Thank you. Great to be back in the villages. We got a beautiful day, and we got a great legislation that we're going to sign today, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the morning. You know, we're here we got a number of people. We got our Commissioner of Agriculture, Wilton Simpson, Secretary of State for Florida, Cord Byrd. We've got the sheriffs from both Sumter and Marion, Breeden and Woods, Sumter County Supervisor of Elections, Bill Keene, Lake County Commissioners, Senator Grahl, Mazzullo, Representatives Cobb, Persons Malika, Yakorsky, and Senator Truenow, and I think we probably have some more people, but we also have our Chief Financial Officer, a guy some of you know named Blaise Ngolia, and he was trying to get me to do something about, you know, announcing that somehow we're going to be ceding authority to California or this or that, and then do an April Fool's. The problem with that is if I say that, they will splice it and they will put that up there. So I told them I'm not going to do it. Maybe in private we can do some April Fool's stuff. We were able to do some stuff for my kids, but, you know, I've just learned in this area, you say something, oh, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. But I want to thank Blaise. He used to be the senator from here, and now he's the Chief Financial Officer. He's doing a really good job holding particularly local governments accountable for spending. And the reality is, and, you know, we're going to be working on a bunch of stuff over the next 4 to 6 weeks in Tallahassee, but in 2019, so the property tax that people pay does not go to us at the state, that we were funded differently, and we've cut taxes every year, and we've eliminated, and we've done a bunch of stuff, and we're proud of that. But the property tax in 2019, local governments throughout Florida took in $32 billion in property tax revenue. Today it's $60 billion. And so the question is, okay, yeah, you know, the population's grown, the inflation has happened, yeah, we still see that. So 32, and not saying that they were spending everything perfectly then, but let's just assume it's going to be more than 32 when you account for that, but not 60, right? And so he's been able to show the overspending in a lot of these places, and you're talking about billions and billions of dollars. So when we do the homestead property tax exclusion, and we do that for the ballot, just understand this is absolutely something that will be meaningful, but it's also something that's doable unless you just think that more revenue should be coming in so that in 3 or 4 years they're getting 83 or 84 billion from 32. But that's not sustainable. We know that. So he's done a really good job of showing that, because you'll hear people say, oh, we need to keep taxing, otherwise we can't afford basic service. Did they not have basic services in 2019? I seem to think, I remember coming, we did, right? And so how much more can people be paying? And so we're going to do something about it. I think it's the #1 thing we can do to give people relief in terms of the things. You know, look, gas has gone up, groceries, all this stuff. I wish we controlled that, and I would just set it. I'd set it at $1 a gallon. That's not what government, unfortunately, the state government can't do that, right? I would set eggs low. I would do all that if that was the way it worked. It does. But the one thing we do set, and in this one it's through the Constitution, that the local government is tax. So we have an opportunity to do something really, really meaningful, and Blaise has been a big part of that. So I want to thank him for doing that. He's also been a big part of stuff we've done over the years in our subject today, which is election integrity. And you go back a quarter of a century, Florida was a mess when it came to doing elections. We had hanging chads, we had all these different things, and as much as there were problems, you had a very close election in Florida that year in 2000. It really exposed every ward. I mean, if you have a landslide, you can still have irregularities. People just don't fixate it on it as much. This was razor thin. They're holding up these things in Palm Beach County, all these places. They wanted to only count blue counties to recount all this stuff. Florida Supreme Court at that time was a total disaster. That's one of the things people don't talk about. You know, when I got elected, we had probably the most liberal Supreme Court in the country. Now I've put 6 on, and we have the most conservative Supreme Court in the country. And so that's a big change for. So it exposed that, And there was work that was done after that, which I think there was a lot of really good stuff done. But then we got to 2018, and I'll never forget, I mean, it was a very competitive election. Florida was a little bit different in terms of the political demography then. It was a blue wave year, which was tougher for us as Republicans. But anyways, we're doing it. And we come into election, and then the votes come in. And then I get a call from the Democrat, concede. I go out, I give the speech and all this, and then we had other candidates running that also won. And I think, I don't know what it was like 1%, a little bit more than that. And so, great, you go to bed, you go the next day, and then I think then either the next day or maybe even 2 days later, I get a call, hey, there's more votes coming in Palm Beach and Broward counties. I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, your margin's going to go down. And we had these margins. And so, we had an agriculture commission candidate that was winning by like 30 or 40,000 votes. And then after this vote dump, ended up losing by a few thousand votes. And we actually had a Democrat in 18 win, quote, win as a result of that. And then we went from, I think it's like a half a percentage point off the margin. And then we had a U.S. Senate race that went to a hand recount because they kept chipping away. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, where are these ballots coming from? How is this possible? So when we came in, we said, well, we aren't going to play like that. We're going to make sure that we do it right. So one of the things we did was, we effectuated the removal of the supervisor of elections in both Palm Beach and Broward counties. And that was important to clean house. But we also just understood that it's very important that when the polls close, you know how many votes have been cast, and then you count them. What you don't want is to have 100,000 votes come in, somehow be found a day or two after, or 3 days. Now in California, they count for months or weeks, at least weeks, sometimes months. You'll go and you'll wake up on election, the morning after the election, someone will be up 6 or 7 points, and then the machine kicks in, and then 2 weeks later they lose. And that totally destroys confidence in the system. So I knew that was a problem, and we had to make sure we clean up. So we made those choices. And look, not every place in Florida was a big problem. There were some that are big problems. Those two counties historically, unfortunately, had been big problems. But we knew that there was other things that needed to be done, and particularly where we saw what happened in the 2020 election in some of these states where they had the mass mail balloting, you had ballot harvesting, Zuckerbucks, you had all these different things were happening where no one knew what the hell was going on. So we said we're not going to do that, and I know Blaze was very involved in pushing legislation. Commissioner Simpson, who was the Senate leader, helped shepherd this through the Florida Senate, which was really put Florida as the leader in election integrity around the country. We have now mandated that voter rolls are updated annually and that ineligible voters are removed. We have, when you do an absentee ballot request, you now got to show voter ID so that we know where that's going. We've also banned ballot harvesting in the state of Florida, which that's a very bad practice. I mean, how ridiculous is, it was a big thing to have a secret ballot, right? You go in, you pull the curtain or whatever, however you do. I mean, we have the dividers in Florida. Some places used to even have a curtain. You do and you put it in. It's kind of like a solemn thing. And then that devolved into like someone with a satchel of votes just dumping these in like some drop box in the middle of town somewhere that's unattended. What a farce. So we banned the ballot harvesting. We banned having drop boxes in the community. just sitting there. You can bring it to the supervisor's office, or you could, where people vote, if you want to drop it off, that's one thing, or you can mail in the absentee, and you got to have ID to be able to do that. We banned mass mailing of ballots. So in California, they just send a ballot to everybody indiscriminately, whether you ask for it or not. That's not absentee voting. That's just sending these things out, and these ballots will just float around in the ether in these states. And in places like Nevada that does it, you're in Vegas and you're like renting an apartment, and they'll send you a ballot, and then they'll send ballots for the 3 or 4 people that rented the apartment before you did. So you got 4 or 5 ballots showing up at your place. That is totally unacceptable. And they don't update the voting rolls. They don't update the voting rolls. They're sending ballots to people who are not even living in the state anymore, and that is not the way you do business. So we've made sure that that doesn't happen in the state of Florida. We also made sure that you have identifying documents if you're changing voter registration. And we did something that I think we were the first ones in the country to do it. We banned something called Zucker Bucks. So what happened in 2020 was you had these nonprofit groups funded by Mark Zuckerberg and I think some other people, but he was the main. He did hundreds of millions. And what they would do is they would go to like Milwaukee and they would give people to actually run the election from this, quote, nonprofit. And so they're going to harvest ballots in Democrat areas, basically. And they're going to administer in Democrat areas. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Elections are a government function. You're subcontracting out to some PAC or some nonprofit that's got hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not the way this is supposed to work. So we banned it. And I think we were the first ones to do it. There wasn't a lot of Zuckerbucks in Florida, to be frank. It was more in some of these states like Wisconsin. I think there were Zuckerbucks in Nevada, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe Michigan, maybe some of these other places. So you had some, Georgia, a lot of Zuckerbucks in Georgia. So we got rid of it and banned it. Now, some may have heard Zuckerberg bought a place in Florida down in Miami, and just want to let you know that is not going to change our posture on Zuckerbucks one bit. They are banned. We also have no, when you submit a ballot, there's no internet voting. It's all, you put the piece of paper in the kitty. And then you have hand counts, you have audits, you have everything like that. So it's really robust, it's really good. But we also understood that you can have the best rules in the world, but if people violate the rules and nothing happens, then they're not worth as much. And the reality is, I think, is twofold. One, a lot of prosecutors focus on kind of the bread and butter crimes that happen. I mean, we just signed a bill, unfortunately, to hold sex offenders accountable. This one guy was let out. He got convicted of pursuing sex with a minor. He showed up. The jury rendered the verdict. And then you have sentencing assigned at a later date, and the judge released him while sentencing was pending instead of remanding him to custody, and he ended up murdering a 5-year-old girl. And so, you know, these are things that are obviously very significant. And I think a lot of prosecutors just instinctively are going to gravitate to those kind of core crimes that they want to try to hold people accountable for. So I get that. Then you also have, you know, in some of these jurisdictions, they just don't believe in doing voter fraud. That's just the reality. You're not going to see them, particularly in the bigger blue areas. They say it doesn't exist and they don't want to pursue. So what we did is we established in state government an Office of Election Crimes and Security. So the purpose of that office is to investigate and prosecute voter fraud. And we've now brought more prosecutions for voter fraud in Florida since that office was created than probably everywhere else in the country combined at this point. We've brought cases against illegal aliens, against people that voted in multiple jurisdictions, against people that are convicted of rape and murder that are not eligible to be voters. So we've been able to do that and actually hold people accountable. And what I found is if people know there's going to be accountability, then doing any shenanigans, it's just not worth it. Why would you want to do it and end up with a significant penalty? You do it when you think you know you can get away with it. And so we put the kibosh on that, where our election crimes office, I think, has been really, really good. And then compare that to what happens in other states. So in 22, 4 years ago, we had these reforms in, and I told people, you're gonna have the results very quickly. And the polls close at 7 Eastern and 7 Central, 8 Eastern. Basically, the whole state is closed by that point. And you had the results by 9 o'clock at night. Now, granted, we won by so much that the election wasn't in doubt. Right after the polls closed, they called the race immediately. It's been a long time since that's happened in Florida, I can tell you that, but that happened. But they tabulated, and then they produced the results. 2024 presidential election, 10, 12 million votes, however many it was, comes in, tabulates, and you have the results. Compare that to some of these other places where it's like, well, you know, we got to get this ballots in, and we got these coming in, and this and that, and, you know, Arizona takes time, California, Pennsylvania. They were actually accepting ballots in Pennsylvania that came in after the election with no postmark. Well, how are you doing that? And so you have all these different ways that they've done it in ways that don't inspire confidence. So all you have to do is watch these elections and see how Florida performs, and we've become the envy of the nation. Who would have thought that 25 years ago? Not many people probably would have thought that. And we're a big state. It's not always easy to be able to do. At the same time, as much as we've led on banning ballot harvesting, Zuckerbucks, voter ID, all these things that are really important, we know that there's always more to do. So today, I'll be signing House Bill 991, which is the Florida version of the SAVE Act, which will bolster our election integrity measures. Now, it's interesting, they're proposing the SAVE Act in Washington, D.C. It does a number of things. Well, the original proposal did a lot. It did things not even related to elections only. It did things like ban the mutilation and sex changes for minors, which I obviously support, but we did that years ago in Florida, so that's done. There were other things that we're proposing about protecting women's sports, which I obviously support, but we did that years ago in Florida. And then on some of the voter identification and making sure people are citizens, I support that. But it's interesting, if the Save America Act federally were to be enacted, 99.7% of Florida voters have already complied with what that law requires. And so you're talking in Florida, very small number of people that would, and not to say they're not eligible. I mean, it may have been when they signed up or whatever. So that's pretty impressive that that's where we already are as a state, that this major piece of legislation would have an impact, but it would have a much smaller impact in Florida because we've already done what they're looking to be able to do. But this bill protects and expands integrity in our voter registration process by requiring the verification of U.S. citizenship when you're doing your voter registration. Our Constitution in the state of Florida says only American citizens are allowed to vote in our elections, and so we need to make sure that that is the law. The bill also requires all voting to be done using paper ballots, allowing for a verifiable hard copy in the event of a recount. And we keep all that. We don't. The supervisors do. You have some of these elections that are very close, and sometimes they go through, and you can count by hand and go through and do that. And I think you need physical evidence. I've never supported the idea that you just vote on a computer, because who knows what's happening with those. So this way, if there's a dispute, you just grab the ballots, you go through, you have observers, and people are able to see for themselves. We're also making sure that when you're providing information or identification, that we're using secure forms of identification. So we're not using, we tried to do this years ago, legislature didn't do it, but they finally did it now, about these student IDs. I mean, a student ID does not mean you are a resident of the state of Florida. Student ID means you're going to school. Now, most of our state universities, our undergrad is 90% in-state, system-wide, but still, that doesn't mean that that's everybody. So they're not doing that. You got to have a valid ID that proves that you are a resident of the state of Florida. We also bolster our accountability for election crimes, particularly petitions. So these petitions, it's been, first of all, we've done a lot to rein in the abuse, but they try to get on special interests. They spend tens of millions of dollars to try to get on the ballot and to try to change our Constitution. And they're allowed to write an amendment. Are they writing that amendment in a way that's clear to voters, or are they trying to write it in a way that's going to trick as many voters as possible? Obviously, it's the latter. So they try to do this. All the people, all the groups that are involved in this will make money if these things pass. And so they got to get these petitions. And what we found is it's rife with fraud, fraudulent petitions. There'll be people, it's like, hey, you have a 75-year-old lady in Lady Lake, and all of a sudden she's being told that she signed a petition to make weed a constitutional right. And she, I didn't like that. I didn't ever sign that. Well, how did it get there then? Somebody did that. And so there's been a number of prosecutions about this. We need to make the penalties even. And honestly, cheating in a candidate race is bad, but cheating to change the Constitution, you have one election, you have another one that comes up. So if somehow there's a miscarriage of justice, that's much easier to correct. Once something's in the Constitution, you can't unring that bell. And I just think that should be a process that's being done with integrity and transparency. I think it should reflect the actual will of Floridians, not special interests that try to pull the wool over people's eyes. We also have transparency to the candidate qualifying process, because we want voters to be more informed. So you're not allowed to qualify if you don't meet party affiliation requirements. You have to attest on oath that you meet all the constitutional requirements for office, and if you don't, then there will be cause of action to be able to keep you off the ballot. It requires candidates to disclose any dual citizenship they may possess. I think that's important that you know that as a voter. And then one of my favorites requires new and returning candidates for Congress to disclose stock trading activity while in Congress. And so what it'll be, so say Joe Blow's running for Congress, you will have to say, I intend to trade stocks or I will not trade stocks, and you will have that information. And if they go and they say they're not, and then they do, then when they run again, they have to say, did I trade or not trade? And the reality is it's gotten to the point where it's become a national farce. What goes on when you have Nancy Pelosi outperforming people like Warren Buffett, when you have members of Congress, buying things, and then, a week or two later, major events occur that causes those stocks to go up. It's one thing to hit the jackpot once in your life, but when you see it routinely for people that never had any financial acumen, all of a sudden show up to Congress and they become like, the best hedge fund managers in the country, something's wrong with that picture. And I remember it was bad 10, 15 years ago when I was a U.S. congressman. So I was a 3-term U.S. congressman, I've recovered fully from that experience, and I'm very clear thinking now, and you go in there, it's crazy. But what I said was, I get in, and I said, I'm not doing any stock trading. And so since I got elected in 2012 to the president, I have not traded a single stock while I've been in office. And I just think that that's the right thing to do. Now, I didn't need to do that, but I didn't want to be in a situation where, I'm selling Exxon or buying Micro, and then something happens where I'm voting and people, oh no, you're voting on that because of that interest. So, you do the 401, you do whatever you do for just normal investment, but I think it's really bad look when you see what happens with these members of Congress. So I know they're trying to ban that practice. We don't have the authority to ban because they're federal officials, but we do have the authority to disclosure and do the disclosing of this. And we need to return in this country to a little bit better civic spiritedness, some civic virtue. Like when you get in these positions, it's not about you, right? I mean, it's about doing the people's business, and that may mean you sacrifice a little bit, and that's just the way it ought to be. But I think a lot of folks up there, they view it as an opportunity to be pigs at the trough and just do whatever they can. And then people have lost a lot of confidence in their representatives over the years, partially because of the culture that's been created. That's one of the reasons I'm a big believer in term limits for members of Congress. I just think you need change, and you need to force the change. So I am excited to be able to sign this. This is a big deal, but it isn't as big a deal in Florida because of all the hard work we've done over many, many years. And I think from the time Wilton was Senate president until probably 23, we had 2 or 3 year period where all these issues we just addressed in a very strong way. And what happens on all these? I sign it. They sue us, right? They go to a liberal judge. The liberal judge sides with them. Then we appeal, and then we win, right? So that's probably what will happen on this. I've just seen it enough. I've seen the song and dance long enough. But it's funny because anything that we do, we'll sign. They'll forum shop. They'll go to and there's some judges will rule against us 100%, no matter what, no matter how many times they get reversed. So you do it. And then media, judge rules against Florida election bill, like real. And then, 6 months later, that decision gets reversed. And you won't find much reporting on it getting reversed. It's just that initial one, right? So we've had that, and I would say on our election stuff, 90-some% have been overturned when a judge has tried to stop it on appeal. They get overturned, and sometimes I think we've even gotten to the U.S. Supreme Court to do a stay. So that's just par for the course. We understand that that's happening, and we do our best to be able to overcome that. But that's what I anticipate will happen with this. These changes aren't effective immediately. They're going to be effective in the not too distant future. Nevertheless, I think they're going to try to do it, and I know there's a lot of talk about different stuff with elections federally. The Congress, they've missed a lot of opportunities over the years to address, I think, some real problems. And elections is one of them. I think there's a lot more that could have been done with immigration to stop some of the madness that we see. Now, the border is great now since President Trump came in, but I will tell you there's visa fraud. There's all kinds of chain migration. Birthright citizenship for people here illegally coming in, birth tourism from the CCP, sending people in, go on a 3-week vacation, have a baby, get American citizenship for the baby, and then you go back to communist China? How does that make sense? And the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments about the 14th Amendment and whether that means that citizenship applies to people that are not authorized to be here. Now, when the founder, well, it actually wasn't the founders, it was the Civil War generation, when the framers of that provision of the 14th Amendment, what they were trying to do was overturn the Dred Scott case, because the Dred Scott case said Dred Scott was not a citizen of the United States, which, he was, came from a family that, you go back far enough, was brought here against their will, and then this is the only thing he knew, much different than somebody coming illegally violating the law. So Dred Scott lost the case, and Abraham Lincoln was very forceful in saying that was a bad decision and it shouldn't be followed. Lincoln said it shouldn't be followed. You know, now they'll say, oh, you know, you got the courts are so sad. Lincoln said, I'm not going to follow that decision. Then when the Civil War ended, they did the 14th Amendment, and the idea was to clarify that no, Dred Scott should have won that case, and that he, as well as all the former slaves, were citizens of the United States. But then that has now been applied in ways that the framers of that provision would have never contemplated. Because first of all, we didn't have, coming to America was a big deal in 1865, 66. You just couldn't hop on a plane and get here, stay 3 weeks and hop on a plane and go back to a foreign country. That wasn't the way it worked. And so they weren't thinking in terms of people flooding in violation of the law. But I think if you look at those debates, clearly their intent was not to lead to what's happened. That's for sure. The question is what does the language actually say? How was that originally understood by the people that ratified it? And I think, I mean, yeah, you look at the evidence of that, I don't think that they intended someone to just come here on a visit who's foreign, have a kid, then go back, and then that kid becomes an American citizen. That kind of cheapens the whole process when you make it a tourist thing rather than something that you know, was what they intended. So the court's going to look at that today. I don't know. There's procedural things. There may be reasons why they don't rule for the administration that have nothing to do, but hopefully we'll get some analysis, because they really haven't ever addressed this specific question. They've addressed legal immigrant, someone on a visa from China. They've never addressed the illegal. So I think it's something that's really, really important. But I just, you know, when I put out a thing today, there was an analysis in the most recent year that they have figures, I think 2023, 9% of all babies born in America were born either to people in the country illegally or on birth tourism. Is that something that we think is good for this country? I just don't think that's any way that you run a successful Republican system of government. So I'm going to be looking very intently on that. I think the argument's actually going on right now. We'll get a little bit of tea leaves after that, and we'll just hope. But that's something Congress probably could address too, because they have the enforcement power for 14th Amendment. They could probably legislate within that to avoid the things that we're talking about, and they've never even really tried to do that, and so that's been very, very disappointing. But anyways, I'm not anticipating them passing a SAVE Act federally, and I know there's a lot of states that need a lot of work, including California, including some of these places, but I think you guys here should be comforted in the fact that Florida, yet again, is ahead of the curve. Okay, Wilton, you want to come up?
Thank you, Governor. And I'm going to start off by saying I'm glad we did not cede our authority to elections for California governor. And you know, it's a real honor to be here today. And I'd just like to brag on the governor just for a minute. I've served with the governor. He's now been here 7 years. And I was in the Senate and Senate President during part of that during COVID. And this governor not only did brilliantly leading us through COVID, the hurricanes and the major hurricanes that we've had here in the last several years, but all of the things that we've mentioned, and the governor just mentioned on election integrity, most of that work was done in a bill when I was Senate President. We were very, very proud of those accomplishments back in either 21 or 22 or both. And so it's been a great run, Governor, and you've earned the title of America's Governor, so thank you. Thank you for doing this. Safe, secure, and legal elections are the cornerstone of democracy. We all know how important our law enforcement is to our state and how much they do for us. We don't always look at how critical the elections are for this country. The elected officials standing here today did not forget. We've got some great leaders here today. Florida is leading the nation on election integrity. And think about that. If you were here in 01, some of us were, and we stayed up for 2 or 3, 4 days trying to figure out which Chad was hanging, right? And unfortunately, we got that over with. But we went from that position to the best state in the union. And this governor's work has had a lot to do with that, and we're really thankful for that. As the governor said, we banned Zuckerbucks. That was a big deal 5 years ago, right? We created in that same piece of legislation an election integrity office. We empowered state prosecutors to go after the fraud. We banned ballot harvesting. All of those things seem like a distant future, but at the time that was a really, really big deal. And essentially, Florida was the SAVE Act before there was a potential SAVE Act federally. Since then, our legislature has continued to pass significant pro-democracy reforms each year. Congratulations to the House and Senate sponsors here today, Senator Grahl, Representative Parson-Maleka. I know you'll be speaking about the bill in a few minutes. I am here to thank you for your hard work and celebrate the latest reform aimed at protecting Florida's elections. Today, we signed the Florida's 2026 version of the SAVE Act. What we are hopeful for, because in Florida, we don't take these things for granted. These things were not done in a vacuum. We did it intentionally to have the best elections in the country. We hope that our legislative, our congressional and Senate partners in Washington will have the same courage that we've had here in the state of Florida and make this a nationwide issue. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for your integrity, Governor.
Well, thanks to the Commissioner, and thanks for what he did when he was the leader of the Florida Senate to get the bulk of what we've done. We've done a lot, but definitely the bulk of it was done under his tenure in the Senate, and it's been really, really significant. We also have, so Blaze, I mentioned as CFO what he's doing, but when he was in the House and when he was in the Senate, his two top issues that he really spearheaded, I think, were combating illegal immigration and election integrity. And so all that we've done across all these different issues, across all the different facets of those issues, really Blaze has had an awful lot to do with it, and of course the property tax. So that's a pretty good, to have a public official focusing on the property tax, focusing on illegal immigration, stopping it, and focusing on election integrity. That's a really big deal. So, and he's done a great job with all of it. So come on up.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in the villages. I had the honor of representing you all in the state Senate. First of all, I am deeply disappointed that you did not take the time to play the biggest April Fool's joke on everyone. First, I want to thank the bill sponsors for doing what you're doing. As the governor said, that immigration, election integrity, and taxes were my biggest issues, the things that I focused on most when I was in the legislature. And I know that this issue of an election integrity is in great hands with both of you, so I appreciate that. I also want to give a shout out to newly elected state rep for the area, Samantha Scott. She is going to be an outstanding representative. I look forward to seeing what she is going to be able to accomplish. First, before we go into the bill, I do want to praise and thank this governor for tackling a lot of the affordability issues head on here in the state of Florida. People forget that taxes are part of your housing payment, and housing affordability is an issue that everyone likes to talk about, but very few people actually take action on it. Governor, I want to thank you for your leadership on this. This state will be in better hands this November when we get that constitutional amendment on the ballot and people start seeing their property tax bill being reduced here in the state of Florida. As the governor has said, and I will reiterate, that immigration and elections are two of the biggest issues that I work on, and just because I'm in the CFO's office now does not mean that I stop caring about these issues. So in the legislature, we passed then, with the help of the Senate President, with the leadership of this governor, Senate Bill 90. A lot of the components that you heard here today were in that bill. And the thing that cannot be understated here is the proactivity of this legislature, especially the proactivity of this governor. This governor and I sat down years ago, and we started realizing the deficiencies in the election systems in a lot of areas of the states, and quite frankly, some of the deficiencies that were going on here in the state of Florida. But this governor didn't wait. He said, let's get in the room, let's figure out what the issues are, and not only what the issues are, but let's figure out what the potential issues could be years down the line. And that's why we wrote at that point the landmark bill, Senate Bill 90, which was challenged in the courts, overturned, and now it is the law of the land. plan, which is probably one of the most comprehensive election laws ever written. We went from being the laughing stock of the nation in the year 2000 to being the gold standard of election integrity here in the state of Florida. So it's not just sitting back on our laurels. This is something that we need to do every 2 years. Every 2 years, my opinion only, we should be putting up an election integrity bill to make sure that we are closing the loopholes, because no matter what we put on paper, no matter what is passed into law, you're going to have bad actors trying to circumvent them. We need to identify what they're doing and close the loopholes and make sure that it doesn't happen, because if we do not stay ahead of this, they're going to continually try to game the system. In addition to that, immigration. This governor and the legislature, this state has led on the issue of illegal immigration enforcement. We are leading the United States in deporting criminal illegal aliens from our communities. And that, again, because we started realizing that this has become such a big issue that we had to take action. Election integrity, we had to take action. Immigration, we had to take action. And that's why we are now taking action on election integrity as it regards to illegal immigration. Here's the secret. And I don't know if many people in this room actually know this, but illegals are actually voting in elections now. Whether people want to, you can refute that all you want, but it is absolutely 1,000% true that illegals are voting in our elections. How do we know that? If you're an illegal, there are cities in Maryland that you can vote. It's actually in their ordinances. You can actually vote in Oakland and San Francisco as an illegal. It is actually written in there. So this bad idea that somebody from another country that had come over to our shores illegally can somehow cast a ballot and figure out how we're going to be able to govern ourselves if they're not even a legal resident citizen of this country is already ingrained. The bad idea is already ingrained. Why wouldn't we want to take the extra step and make sure that illegals do not vote in state and or federal elections? And again, here's another issue. Florida SAVE Act. Again, the state of Florida is leading on this issue. The president is right on the national level. This governor has been right on the local level. There is absolutely no excuse. If Florida can do it, there is absolutely no excuse why the federal government cannot pass the SAVE Act. It's sort of ridiculous. Now, you're going to have people coming out and saying that this is a voter suppression bill. Every time we try to crack down on people gaming the system when it comes to elections, you will have people file lawsuits and people claim that is a voter suppression bill. In fact, almost every bill that we've ever passed, they claim that. And almost every election after they claimed the voter suppression was taking place, voter participation increased year after year after year. That's some of the things that the media won't tell you because, especially now, everyone is in favor of voter ID. It's ridiculous that illegals, it's quite frankly ridiculous that we're actually having this conversation of trying to keep illegals from voting out of our federal elections. Just think about that. You wouldn't even think about that, or that wouldn't even cross your mind 30 or 40 years ago, but it's the reality today. But this again, once again, is this governor and the legislature being proactive, making sure that we are doing everything that we possibly can to keep our elections safe and secure. Governor, I want to thank you for what you're doing. Bill sponsors, I want to thank you for what you're doing. God bless you. God bless the great state of Florida.
Well, thanks, Blaze. And we're going to hear from the two bill sponsors in a sec. I know, and I did mention he's not going to speak, but our Secretary of State, Cord Bird, so he's in charge of overseeing all the elections. And I know that there have been, we just had the one guy that got picked up, it was at Palm Beach. So he's been very, very involved with all of that and obviously producing good results. But he's also, Secretary of State is kind of our top cultural official in Florida. And he's spearheading under my direction our America 250 celebration. And I know, are we going to bring any statue to the villages? Do we know yet? We're working on it. So, where they have the founding fathers name, like the counties that have the founders as the namesake, Washington, Madison, Hamilton, Monroe, whatever, we're bringing statues and putting statues of those founders there because, blue states are taking them down. I get them at a great discount, so it's a buyer's market. Why not do it, right? So So we've done Monroe down in the Florida Keys. We've done Alexander Hamilton in Hamilton County. We've done Ben Franklin in Franklin County. We've done, we have not done James Madison yet, but I think that's on the way to be able to do. And I got this beautiful Washington from Mount Vernon. They loaned it to us that I put in the state capitol. So when you go into the Capitol building, if you turn left to go to the governor's office, you see this great statue of Washington. We're getting that, a replica of that, and we're going to put that in Washington County. But then we've also done people that have exemplified the founding ideals of the country. So we did Frederick Douglass in St. Augustine. He gave a big speech there in like 1889. We did Ronald Reagan at Florida International University. The president's house is named after him, and so we put a really big statue, really nicely done. We've got Calvin Coolidge coming up in Lake Wales. That was the last public address for Coolidge as president, was dedication of Bach Tower Gardens right there. Beautiful, amazing part of Florida. And it was, by that time, they had videos. So you can actually look at YouTube and watch him give this talk. And then he left office like a month later, and so and he was a very good president, and he doesn't get enough credit. So we're going to give him credit for that, and we've got others coming in a variety of different things. So it's really exciting. I don't know if there's any other state that's doing much of anything about this. You know, it's like, I mean, I can only imagine, like, if we had like Philadelphia in Florida, like I would be, you know, we would do stuff all that. So there's a lot of history in other parts of the country. We consider ourselves the 14th colony, because we weren't part of the original 13, but it was on the minds of a lot of founding fathers, and they wanted Florida to be a part of the United States, and that happened, of course, over many years, and eventually brought that in for a landing. And now look at us now, we're this big engine. I mean, who would have thunk that back then? But we're going to be doing more, and I don't know what we do with villages. I know we had talked about maybe bringing something here, but I think a lot of people here would appreciate it if we did. Okay, so we've got our legislators, and you know, I appreciate what they've done on this, but also these two in particular. You know, all these Republicans, they run as lions, and then they get in and they end up as lambs. A lot of them do, like in Washington, all this other stuff. There's a difference between how they campaign and then how much they're fighting when they get in. We just have a problem with that in the Republican Party across the country. And so, you know, when I see people that go in, they say they're going to be conservative, and they go in and do that and fight the really tough fights, you know, they deserve a lot of credit for that. And so we have Senator Grawl from Indian River County, and then we have Jen and Persons Malika, our representative from Lee County. So you two want to come up and say what you want?
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for the compliment. Thank you to this team. I mean, looking at who's here today, knowing how long we've been working on this, President Simpson, Commissioner Simpson, under Speaker Sprowls, I served as the chair of the Public Integrity and Elections Committee and worked with Blaze on the SB 90. Secretary Byrd was in the House with us at that time, has worked on these issues. And Jenna, you and I have been working on these issues for many years. And I just think, you know, in a state where there's term limits, it's great that you still have a bench of people that understand these issues and are focused and committed to being proactive, just like Blaze indicated. I think if he would have been in the Senate, he probably would have fought me for this bill this year. I'm fairly certain I would have lost. But it was such an opportunity, because election integrity, it really hit me in law school. It was 2000. I was in Wisconsin, and there were students going from precinct to precinct and bragging on television about how many times they had voted. And I thought, how does this happen? This is nuts. Like this, there are states where you can literally just walk down the street, go to another precinct, and you can vote again, and we get one vote. And so Florida has done so many things right since 2000 to correct that, what happened in that year. And I just think, what an opportunity to do something, though, that was really pretty common sense. I mean, I couldn't believe that it was a debate about whether or not you had to be a citizen in order to vote in the state of Florida. That's not debatable. Not only is, and it's in our Constitution. Also, the voter ID. issue, to be able to really close the loop, student identification card. I mean, that's a student identification card. That's not even a college ID from a Florida institution. It says student ID. Your homeowners association card would count as voter ID. Moving forward, it won't. And that's important because we have state systems, we have real IDs that there is credibility and fidelity in, and we should be able to count on those, not something that's not secure. And so very common sense things, but I'm grateful to my colleagues in the Senate because many of the things that you heard about in the bill and my colleagues in the House were ideas and things that had come up that they wanted to work on, and they are all encompassed in this bill, and I think we should be really proud of it. The biggest criticism we got along the way is this isn't really happening. And just like the CFO said, it absolutely is happening, and we have the Office of Election Crimes and Security who puts together a report, and in that report outlines the times that people have admitted illegal aliens have admitted to voting in our elections. They have admitted to it when confronted with that information. They have affirmed that they are citizens wrongfully as far back as 2000 in some of the cases that they've looked at, and that individual voted in 3 different elections, 22, 23, and 24, I believe. And so it's like we have this knowledge and information. We must be proactive in order to ensure that every citizen in Florida can have trust in the system that elects our citizens to public office, that puts citizens' initiatives on the Constitution, or on the ballot to be considered in our Constitution. And it's just, I'm proud of the work that we've done in the legislature. I thank Senate President Albritton for his leadership, and the other senators, and the Speaker Perez for his, in making sure that we continue to lead on this issue. So thank you so much, Governor.
Good afternoon. Well, it's a great day to be able to come up from Lee County and join with friends in the villages. And I just want to start by saying thank you to our governor for not only bringing us all here together today, but for being a champion for Floridians and for leading on issues that make a real difference in our lives, both today and in the future, including ensuring election integrity. When I talk with voters about election integrity, what they tell me that they want, it's pretty straightforward. 1, they want to make sure their ballot is counted. And 2, they want to make sure that their ballot is not offset by a fraudulent ballot. Election fraud is real. It's not a matter of if fraud will occur, it's a matter of when, and it's our job to put in place safeguards to protect our elections from that fraud. No state does a better job at that than Florida. When I first ran for the State House in 2020, I promised voters that election integrity would be one of my top priorities. And we specifically talked about the need to ban ballot harvesting, because we saw in my home county of Lee that folks were showing up with sacks of ballots. So I got elected, and I'm a freshman legislator, and I'm making some calls around the Capitol to see, can we get this done? And I talked to Blaise Ngolia, who was a House member at that time, and I was so excited to learn that Blaise was already working on it, that he had a bill that would ban ballot harvesting and more, and it was a true honor to watch him in action and be part of the House when we passed that bill in 2021. But it took political leadership to get that done, political willpower, and but for the political willpower of our governor, but for the political willpower of other leaders like Commissioner Simpson and CFO Ngolia and our colleagues in the House and the Senate, the job wouldn't have gotten done. But it did get done. It got done in 2021. We banned ballot harvesting, and year after year we have continued to get the job done for Floridians, for you, to ensure that your ballots are safeguarded. And we continue to get the job done this year with passing Florida's SAVE Act. This bill answers the call of Floridians. Floridians want to ensure that only U.S. citizens vote in our elections. Floridians want common sense voter ID, and Floridians want transparency in the process, including our candidate qualification process. This bill answered that call on all fronts. It's been a true honor to work on this legislation. I had the honor of working on it last year with then Senator Angolia, and I had the honor of working on it this year with Senator Grahl, as well as my House colleagues, including my prime co-sponsor, Representative Travolsi. It's been a true honor to work with both of you, along with our colleagues. And Governor, it's been an honor to work with you and your team, as well as Secretary of State Byrd and your team, to ensure that Florida remains the gold standard of election integrity. And I'm going to close by saying, Governor, my last thank you is thank you for never saying the job is done. There is always more work to do, and under your leadership, we remain the model for the country.
Okay, today is the 1st of April. Wow. All right, who wants one? Who else? Anyone else? I got more. Anyone? Okay. Anyone else? Yes. They all, you know. So what I've learned on this is when we would do these and we'd have these little kids, I would give them, but the permanent marker did not work well with them. So we now have the non-permanent, but like, I don't know who thought that I needed 6 of these at the Villages of all places. Maybe your grandkids are on spring break. Anyways, good job, guys. Got it? All right. Good job. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Well, that's good work. I appreciate everybody that's been involved, and we're going to be doing some other stuff. Aaron, what else do you have that we need to act on? Anything else major?
I have surrogacy and I have foreign laws.
Okay. Is that the Sharia? It is. Okay. We're doing real strong against Sharia, so stay tuned on that. And then Jenna has really necessary about the partisan school unions, to hold them accountable, especially when they don't represent the teachers or the students, and that's been a long time coming. So you're going to end up where teachers don't want to join, they're not paying dues, which is their right, and we're doing more money through the state, and yet you have this little cabal that will like even stop the pay increases to try to leverage for other things. And so some of these teachers didn't get their money on time, and yet they have very little support. And it's like, look, if you don't have support, you shouldn't be representing people that don't want you to support them. So now they can be decertified if they don't have that support. And I think that's something that is appropriate in terms of accountability. Okay, do we have any questions back there? Yes. I'm not doing it, but I think it's going to be really exciting. I mean, this is, we go back to the 70s where you've had something of this, and I think the plan is to have them further away than has ever been done. But it does show you the Space Coast of Florida. Obviously, that was the birthplace of a lot of the launches during the Cold War and all that. But then, when the Cold War ended, some of this stuff kind of was not on the front burner. I remember when President Obama retired the space shuttle, you go down in that part of Florida, and it was hard times, and there was a lot of uncertainty. And then what we've seen is we've seen a rejuvenation of space, largely because of private investment. So you have Elon Musk doing all these launches. You have other companies that have been involved, and now they've worked with NASA. And I know the president has had a lot of interest in making sure that we're leading in space. So I think it's an exciting time. It's one of the unique things about being in Florida. We got all these different things all around the state, but one thing we can say is you look at the amount of rockets that get fired up into outer space, the lion's share of them are happening right here in the free state of Florida. And I think that's meaningful. I think it's special for a lot of people. Yes.
The legislature is still left with some unfinished business in this session. Is there anyone on the know of terms or property taxes, especially
The dates aren't finalized yet. We've been having discussions with the folks over in the Senate. I don't know whether they have a broad outline of an agreement on the budget. My view on it is, guys, this ain't rocket science. Like, you have what we've done in recent years. It's worked well. The voters returned you to office in record numbers in 22 and 24 as a result of that. So stick with what works, and let's get the job done. But it will be in April with not only that, probably property tax in April. You could do that really a lot later if you wanted to, but I think probably that's when it'll be. And that just means you guys vote in November. So whether you do it in today, the end of April, June, you're voting in November. That's just the reality. They say, well, you could set a special election. Yeah, if you get 3/4 of the legislature, you could do it, but that we don't have 3/4 that would vote to do that. So we are where we are for November, but that'll be good. That'll be very meaningful. The redistricting is going to be done in April, and then we'll see what else comes down the pike. We'll see what the budget looks like. So hopefully, by the end of April, all the work that the public expects from them will have been completed. And obviously, I'll have some bills to sign, budget, all this other stuff. But I think it's important that they do it. I know when Wilton was Senate President, and we got out right, mid-March, and everyone was able to go, and they go to their districts, talk to their constituents. The people that were running again got to do that. Of course, the members of the legislature, most of them have business or they work, so they got to do that as well. So I think it just behooves us or them to get that done. And then let's move forward in a very positive way. And I anticipate that happens, but at least I have not been informed that there's been a full resolution on what had separated them and created the budget impasse in the first place. I think most people here just say, just keep doing what you guys have been doing. It's proven to be very successful, and it's interesting. When I became governor till now, we've almost quadrupled the state's rainy day fund. We have much more budget reserves on top of that than we ever had for all of Florida's history. We did an accelerated debt repayment program we launched a few years ago to rapidly pay down some of Florida's legacy debt. So we had 180 years as a state, 181 years as a state. If you look at that debt, just in my tenure as governor, we've retired over half of it in 7 years. And so we now have very low debt per capita compared to other states. I think we're the lowest. So we've been able to do that. And part of it is, and then we're saving money because you're buying the bonds at a discount and then retiring them, and so then you don't have to pay the interest that you would have if you had serviced it normally. So we've been able to save more than $1 billion on interest costs and also on principal by buying at a discount. So that's good fiscal stewardship. So there's been all kinds of things that I think have been really positive, but yet we're doing a lot of big things. I did Moving Florida Forward. We've got the Ocala I-75. We're doing that to try. This is a tough stretch traffic. Massive amount of money going in to do that. It's going to be a lot better. It doesn't happen overnight, but that wouldn't have even started until next decade had we not done our program with Moving Florida Forward. You look at what we've done on I-4, just the temporary lane we put in over there in Polk County. It's been a big deal. That's going to come to fruition, and that's been going on. That wasn't supposed to start till then. You look at what we've done for springs and environmental restoration and Everglades, all these different things that a lot of people didn't think were even possible to do. We've done that in a really big way. We've done education money. I mean, we've increased funding for teachers, I think every year, certainly since you've been president with the Senate, so 4 or 5 years, 6 years, we've been doing that. So that's, I think, what people want to see while making sure that we have a very good fiscal trajectory. And I think we'll be able to say, however this budget turns out, if you look over the last 4 years, we've basically had a stable budget. There has not been any significant overall increases. You know, we've done more money for things that people want to see, but we've done that within the context of a budget. And as the state's grown and we have had inflation, we've still held the line in these more recent years. And so our budget, even though we have millions of more people than New York State does now, our budget's less than half of New York State's budget. Our roads are better, our schools perform better, our services are better. I wouldn't want to go to the DMV in New York City if I could do it, you know, in the villages. So that just shows you that it can be done. So I think that's a great success story. And I remember working with you know, different leaders in the legislature over the years, and we were able to deliver on big priorities, but also do it in a way that was intelligent and was not going down the road of a California or an Illinois or some of these places where they're never going to be able to. You cannot tax people enough to be able to make up for the fiscal recklessness. It's just not going to happen, but that's what they're going to try to do. And they've caused a lot of these people in California to leave because they're trying to do a wealth tax now, which is basically whatever your wealth is on paper, you just got to pay 5% of that, which honestly, even somebody that's not worth a terrible amount of money, that's not an easy thing to do. So if you have a 401k, they're going to count that and you got to pay a tax for basically an unrealized gain. So it's not a effective vehicle to raise revenue. But the thing that they're doing in California, and this affects these guys that have started companies or whatever, if you own 5% of the common stock, but you have 50% of the voting rights, they take the valuation of the whole company and they impute you owning 50% of the company, even though you don't. So now you're talking about people that if they have voting rights in some of these big companies, they're having to pay tax on billions of dollars, sometimes tens of billions, maybe even hundreds of billions that they don't actually even own on paper. And so how stupid is that, and how stupid can you be to do it? So that's why you've seen some of these people come. And I'm not asking anyone to move here, and I said I ain't changing the Zuckerbucks ban. I don't care. Like, we're going to keep that. But it just shows you that the policy really does matter and people respond. And it's one thing, nobody wants to pay more tax, and we've obviously have done less tax in Florida, and we're working on the property tax for homestead, which I think would be really, really significant. But, you know, if someone has you pay a tax, there's a limit to where you think you may not like it, and then where you think it's just totally unjust and crazy that you're going to pick up and leave. And that's what California's done with this proposal. So we see it here in Florida, and it's been something that has been very destructive. Even the idea, they haven't even enacted it yet. That's going to be in November, but they're making it retroactive to January 1st. So people aren't taking any chances. They're hightailing it out of here. And, you know, we'll see. We'll, you know, I don't know if, you know, some of those guys will ever make their way to the villages. They're kind of down in this Miami area is kind of the place that a lot of them have wanted to go. But nevertheless, you do good policy, you hold the line on all this stuff, and you know, you give people more opportunity. And so that's what we've done throughout the years with all this stuff, and we've had you know, really, really great performance on all this stuff, particularly with budget, and we want to keep that momentum going. So, okay, guys, great to see you all. We will see you soon.